And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Assembly Call, where it was a tale of two halves tonight at the Kohl Center in Madison, Wisconsin. Indiana led 29-19 at halftime. Had us all feeling good, thinking that maybe the what we had seen in that Northwestern game, the growth that we had seen was going to continue. And then Wisconsin started making shots, and they didn't stop making shots, and they end up winning the game by 11, outscoring Indiana by just a whole bunch in the second half. And what really was a positive first half turned into a disaster in the second half for the Hoosiers, dropping Indiana to 5-9 in the Big Ten. And yeah, so that happened. I'm your host, Jared Morris. This is the Assembly Call. We're going to break it all down for you. I'll be joined by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips here in just a moment. When you look at tonight's game, I mean, really, like I said, a tale of two halves. I mean, in the first half, Indiana did a lot of good things. I mean, Wisconsin did miss a lot of shots in the first half. There's no question about it. But Indiana was active. I thought they did some good things on offense. They did, they played some decent defense, even though the Badgers missed some shots. But a lot of that was missing in the second half. I thought they came out just maybe a quarter step slower in the second half. They didn't quite seem to have the same confidence, the same movement on offense. I will say that the one positive for this game, as we look to extract a positive from this trip, is that I thought Noah Vonleh did a lot of good things, and I thought the game plan for Indiana and the way that they got Noah Vonleh involved was encouraging. Noah, we know, has struggled to establish position in the post, and Indiana's guards have struggled to get him the ball in the post. And I thought tonight Indiana decided to just let him face up more, and he knocked down a couple of threes, and he drove to the basket and scored that way. And really, I thought, was able to show off his complete set of skills, did a decent job on defense, grabbed some rebounds, scored some points. For me, the real positive tonight is just what Noah Vonleh was able to show and the way that Indiana's offense was able to get him involved. Outside of that, in the second half, not really a whole lot to feel positive about. We will break it all down as we always do on the Assembly Call. Make sure you go to assemblycall.com/subscribe, get on the email list, get Andy Bottom's in-depth analysis that we do after every game. It's a late one tonight. We're not sure if we're going to send one out tomorrow, but get on there anyway because you're not going to want to miss all the analysis that we do. So with that said, let's go around the horn, get some thoughts from the crew here. If you have comments that you would like us to address, you can tweet us with the hashtag AssemblyCall, and we'll be able to pull them up. Or you can also there on the YouTube video or at assemblycall.com/hangout leave your question as a comment, and we will be able to get it. And so with that said, let's go over to Andy and then Ryan and get their thoughts on another Hoosier loss.
Well, I kind of said before we were talking on here, I said if anybody wants to see the season kind of summarized in one game, I would probably give them a tape of this where you see flashes and you see things that get you excited. And then just as soon as that happens, you see things go completely off the tracks and, a 10-point halftime lead turns into a 11-point loss. So I thought, the beginning of the second half stuff was interesting because I think we all worried about that when you look at how this team has typically performed with the lead and how they've responded to those situations. And then, I even saw, Yogi's mom, Doc Libby, tweet out something about, having talked to him about it, and then it was something mental for them. And it definitely looked that way. I mean, things got away from him pretty quickly, and I even was advocating calling a timeout as soon as they came out and scored 4 points because it just felt like you could feel that momentum building and wanted to try to do anything to stop it. And, I think that this was a pretty good microcosm of the season. You saw some good things, but ultimately on a night like tonight, couldn't find five guys to be together on the floor that were actually playing well. I mean, Yogi and Noah scored the majority of the points, and if you throw in Stan Robinson and Will Sheehy, those four scored all but two of the points for the game. And the balance that we saw against Northwestern, and obviously the competition is different and all those kinds of things, that balance just by the wayside. And tonight, while there might be things that we will eventually talk about with some things about Crean, just because I think that's kind of like a standing topic at this point. I mean, I honestly don't know who else he could have played that would have done any better because you really just weren't getting a lot from most of the guys coming off the bench. And even Robinson got a couple of his points late and did some damage in the second half versus Sheehy, who scored the first 7 points of the game and didn't score again after that. So I thought tonight, unless this, devolved into a game of 2-on-2, IU probably wasn't going to win, and just, showed where they really struggled to get solid performances from other guys, and that was no different than things we've seen so far this season, and things snowballed pretty quickly, and as it was said in Anchorman, that definitely escalated quickly in the second half.
Is there any way we can restart the Big Ten season, just play them all 2-on-2? Because I feel like we'd have a really good chance in every game to win.
I think it's worth a shot. I'm also imposing the no halftime rule from here on out. I don't care if the other team goes in the locker room. Just sit on the floor and shut up and don't say anything, and just wait for the second half to start. See what kind of halftime entertainment they have. Go to the concession stand. I really don't care, but whatever goes on in the locker room is not doing this team any good. So I say just stay out there and ride it out.
Orange slices and water on the bench.
Ryan, you have a very combustible look on your face right now. Let's give you the floor and rant away.
First of all, I'm tired of breaking down the same game every time we do this. I mean, it's essentially the same thing happens. We play well in stretches, then play like garbage and end up losing at the end. And like Andy said, there were no substitution pattern problems or anything like that. This team just wasn't going to win at Wisconsin, apparently. And it was almost like as soon as Brust hit a couple threes to open the second half, the team knew and the team tried. I mean, look, this team hustles and it tries to play hard. It just doesn't play smart, and that'll lose you games, and especially in a tough conference. I thought guys like Sheehy and Troy Williams didn't play well defensively in the second half and were just abused. And whether that was a team concept thing or whether it was just them getting beaten, I don't know, but it just didn't. They didn't look good. I thought there was definitely, as you said, Jared, there was a concerted effort to get Vonleh the ball in the paint, and but at some point, him scoring 20 points isn't going to be enough for a win. We've got to get everybody involved and have more balance. And really, in the second half, once Wisconsin started making shots, I think everybody felt like, all right, that's the game. With about 10 minutes left. I don't think anyone thought Indiana had a chance, just the way they were playing, the way Wisconsin was playing, the way the Hoosiers were playing. And apparently the officials agreed because they did not help Indiana at all. And we can get into that in a little bit, but I need some time to cool down from that thought.
This was a really odd game because the final score ended, I think, like a lot of people thought it would. I mean, I think Ken Pomeroy's predictions, Indiana was predicted to lose by 12 or 13 with about a 12% chance to win, and that's about what happened. What was odd is just how it happened. No one expected Indiana to come out like they did in the first half, start out really well. I mean, they jump out to a 7-2 lead with, Will Sheehy acting like he's Calvert Chaney for 3 minutes and then not doing anything on offense for the rest of the game. But the Hoosiers were able to sustain it there through that first half, leading 29-19, and then just a complete collapse in the second half. So I think we probably expected it to be a little bit more surgical for Wisconsin throughout the game, but they did all that work in the second half. I mean, you look at it, as we start to look at the numbers, Wisconsin scores 19 points in the first half, 50 in the second half. Indiana actually scored 29 points in each half. So the offense was relatively consistent for whatever that's worth. And you dig deeper into the numbers, Wisconsin scores 1.29 points per possession. And that's after really, I don't know what the number was in the first half, but it wasn't very good. But their second half was enough to get them up there. On the positive side for Indiana, they only turned the ball over on 17.5% of their possessions. But in the first half, Indiana had 4 assists against 4 turnovers. In the second half, Indiana had 1 assist against 6 turnovers. And as we've learned, looking at some of the statistical analyses of Indiana, there is a correlation between their, ability to get assists and their ability to score and win games. And, early they did a nice job with that assist-turnover ratio of 1-to-1. In the second half, it just got out of whack. Andy, as you kind of peruse the numbers, you look at some of the other ones, free throws, Wisconsin's been a team that's gotten to the free throw line a ton. And we knew that would be big tonight, and, that was huge. They were 22 of 24 from the line. Indiana's only 2 for 3. That's a huge swing in the game right there. Indiana's three-point shooting actually kept a minute. They were 8 for 18. Wisconsin hit 7, most of them coming in the second half. And again, the foul disparity, Indiana has 20 fouls, Wisconsin has 7. Andy, as you kind of look through the numbers, does anything jump out to you? Or kind of from a final box score perspective, I know the first half and the second half was vastly different, but isn't this ultimately kind of what we expected in this game?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the end result was probably there, and I think if you flash the numbers up at the end of the game without kind of knowing, how they were accrued over the course of it, then they probably wouldn't be all that shocking. Even the free throw numbers, I'm sure we'll, get into that a little bit. But you look at the 3-point shooting. IU was, I think, 5 of 9 in the first half, 3 of 9 in the second. But the assist, I think, was the big thing because what I saw a lot on offense in the second half was just a whole lot of standing around, and I think I was actually surprised when I looked at the halftime box score to see that there weren't more assists because I thought there were good. Um, I thought there were some good sequences where Yogi and Noah were on the same side of the floor and they played some two-man sets there that worked out well, and I thought they had guys that Hollowell got his basket off of a cut to the basket. You saw um, Vonleh get a couple kickouts back to him for threes, and I felt like they shared the ball a little bit better in the first half than even the numbers would have indicated, but that pretty much went out the window in the second half when it was a whole lot of standing around, and I think Noah made a couple plays toward the beginning of the second half that briefly stopped runs from Wisconsin, which were big because it did feel like it was going to snowball maybe even a little bit quicker than it did, but you look at some of that, and it just felt like, kind of that mindset set in, and it was standing around waiting on somebody else to make a play, and whether it was guys standing around watching Yogi, and it was the kinds of things that we didn't see a lot of during the Northwestern game. And so, we can kind of go back to that game and argue, well, maybe it didn't mean a whole lot because it was Northwestern, but I think the way they were able to score in that game, and even the way they were able to score in the first half of this game, were pretty similar, and there was, decent movement, had some good shots, settled for more jumpers than would have liked to at first, but I thought toward the end of the first half they really did a good job of trying to get the ball toward the basket. And the second half was everything that you expected Wisconsin to do to them in both matchups this year, and kind of what Northwestern really did in that first matchup was they just packed it in, completely shut down any kind of driving lanes, and then it really turned IU into a situation where they were standing around trying to let somebody see who could make a play. And I think it underscores some of the mentality of the team and some kind of fragile mindset they've got at this point in the season where they just didn't seem to have any answers for that.
Ryan, your thoughts on that, specifically in terms of the offense and the difference between the first half and the second half?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was just a lot of movement wasn't there as much as it probably should have been. It's that happens with this team. It stagnates and things stop moving. I mean, you saw against Northwestern, Ryan Carrazza at Inside the Hall did a great breakdown of the offense, the places where it works, how certain cuts work at certain times and things like that. And the offense is built to work. I mean, it's not like this is an offense that is the plays that we run are just awful. I mean, if they were bad, they wouldn't be reused. I mean, I know some people complain about Green and his tactics and all that stuff, but this is a guy who trained under Tom Izzo. He knows how to design a play, and it's just a case of guys not executing correctly or standing around, not cutting hard. When they do cut, just sort of drifting through the motions and not moving with any authority or purpose, and that's a huge problem. I mean, it really is, and we've seen it with this team. When things go bad offensively, it's because of a lack of movement. And, again, I don't know what Crean could have done tonight because everybody who was subbing in, it seemed to be contagious. They just weren't moving, weren't cutting. It was a lot of one-on-one stuff in the second half, and Wisconsin's a very disciplined defensive team. They're not a great defensive team, as one of the better ones in the country, but they also, if you give them an easy, target, they're going to hit it defensively. And if you just drift into the middle, they're going to be able to guard you, and they're going to be able to stay with you no matter how athletic you are. So I think it was just a complete breakdown and really a polar opposite of the first half in the second half.
You guys kind of hit the nail on the head early on that this really feels like breaking down the same game in a lot of ways. I mean, it feels like we're repeating ourselves somewhat. Ryan, let me ask you this, and then we're going to go to some reader and viewer questions because we're getting a ton of them. And if you want to ask questions, tweet us at #assembly or #assemblycall. Go to assemblycall.com/hangout. Leave your question as a comment there. Ryan, let me ask you. In a lot of ways, the fans got what they've been asking for from Tom Crean tonight. I mean, you look at it, Yogi and Noah by far lead the team in field goal attempts. Yogi took 19, Noah took 15. we've been looking for that, especially for Noah to step up like that. The rotation was shortened tonight. There were a lot of things tonight that happened for this Indiana team that we've been calling for from Tom Crean. Again, the end result was very similar to what we thought it would be. I don't think a lot of people really expected to go into the Kohl Center and win, and you have that 10-point lead at halftime, so it shows that you're beating them for 20 minutes. Now, obviously, the second half is very concerning, and that's been a trend. But, to those who are going to be frustrated at Tom Crean after this loss, because there are always people who are frustrated at Tom Crean, me personally, I'm having a hard time coming up with a lot of criticisms for him. I mean, outside of just some of the normal, the offense could have been better in the second half, those things. But in terms of just some tactics, substitutions, and even some offensive strategy things with Noah, we got from Crean at least a lot of what we've been asking for. I just think, the venue, the team we're playing against, and the way they shot in the second half, just weren't able to turn that into a victory or a more competitive performance. I mean, do you kind of agree with that, or are there some areas where you see for critique there?
No, I think that we were really intent on giving the ball to Noah, whether it be in the post or in the high post area or even beyond the 3-point line. But I also think I think it's a misnomer that hasn't been happening all season. Tonight was definitely more than it's been happening, but Noah's been getting his fair share of touches. The problem is he's getting them in places where he can't do anything because he's not getting great position. He's not putting himself in a place to catch the ball and score. He'll just catch it and realize he doesn't have an angle or anything and give it up. And so that's kind of, as we've talked about, it's a nuanced thing. I mean, he touches the ball. It's about, carving out position and touching the ball in a place where you can do something and help the offense. And I think he had more of that tonight, and it was a little better. And frankly, Frank Kaminsky does some nice things on offense. I think he's a complete stiff who just happens to be tall on defense. So I think that you saw a lot better stuff from Vonleh. He's quicker, he's more athletic, and he was getting some good position. But also the problem is if you're just going to Vonleh, you're just going to Yogi, it makes things really easy on the defense because they have 5 guys out there and there are only 2 guys scoring for you. So you need to have a balanced attack, and you need to get other guys involved. And I think the one thing that's really missing this year, other than Yogi, is a shooter, and that would help spread the floor and open things up for everyone else. And we saw that with a guy like Jordan Halls for 4 years. I mean, the impact he had on a defense was staggering. I would say that until Victor Oladipo started shooting threes at a really high percentage, Jordan Halls was the most effective offensive player we had because it opened things up for a guy like Cody Zeller on the inside over the last couple of years. And then Oladipo obviously became a shooter as well, and that really made the offense run to a different degree. So you have to have balance offensively. It's not just about one guy scoring 30 points because if that's only 30 points. You need other guys to contribute as well. It's not a 1-on-5 game. And so, yeah, it's nice to see Noah put up some good numbers, but he's got to put those numbers up while the rest of the offense is coming along with him, and he's got to use his offense to help set up other guys, and then other guys use their offense to set him up. It's a team game, and we really have to get to a point where everybody is contributing.
All right, well, let's go to some questions because we're getting a lot of them. And Andy, I'm going to send this first one over to you. It's our buddy Andy Tuwalski, who often sends in questions, and we quite appreciate them. And he says, a frequent complaint from fans this season, and Andy, you mentioned this earlier, has been our inability to hold on to halftime leads. Many have placed the blame on Coach Crean. In your opinion, is there a common thread among our collapses? And Andy, specifically to you, is there anything you found in your analysis that you can point to that would explain some of these second-half collapses?
Nothing stands out. I do think there have been times when, in nearly every game, the starters have come back out to start the second half. And that, in and of itself doesn't necessarily seem crazy, obviously. The only part that seems a little bit odd is that it's typically they only play together to start the game and then not again after that in the first half. I'm not saying that's been a 100% trend, but I think that's happened certainly more times than not. So then those guys go back out to start the second half, and I think a lot of second halves has been kind of a letdown there. I don't know that it's personnel specific though in that regard, because it's guys that are used to playing and at least have played together for a period of time during that game. They just seem to come out kind of flat, just over and over again, though, which is what I guess to me is the most concerning. I think if there's anything that you look at from tonight's game and want to kind of lay at the feet of Crean, I think some of that starts to be this second half trend. So whether that's really something he did tonight or not, I think people are starting to see that pattern and connecting the dots, and whether that's fair or unfair really doesn't matter at this point. I think that's becoming a wrap for him in terms of not being somebody who's adept at making those adjustments and really having the team come out well in the second half. But I don't know that it's the only personnel thing I've noticed is really what I said, where the starters a lot of times will be back out there, and it may be the first time that they've played together since the beginning of the game. Now on the flip side of that, against Northwestern, that proved to be terrific, and they came out and really played well to start that half. But I think against Northwestern, it was IU kind of did to them what Wisconsin did to IU. They came out, they scored a couple possessions right away, and really put the pressure on at that point, and kind of put Northwestern in that more defensive position where they were trying to bounce back. Versus tonight, it seemed like almost immediately, like I said, I'm thinking Wisconsin scores 2 baskets and I'm ready to take a timeout, and it's a minute into the half. But it felt necessary because both those baskets were so easy, and it just felt like you could see things start to come unwound a little bit. So I think there's if there's anything tonight that I would look at Crean for, it's really what adjustments were attempted to be made at halftime, and really just over the course of the second half as the game started to get away. I say that less from a personnel standpoint and more from a scheme standpoint, because like we said, I mean, you look at the stats, and even without looking at the stats, if you told me, like, give me the best 5 guys, I could name 3 and maybe 4, and you could throw anybody out as the 5th guy. I mean, nobody really played that well, and even the guys I would put as 3rd and 4th, and Sheehy and Robinson, really only played well in parts of the game. So it was definitely a struggle tonight for him to really find any combination that worked, particularly in the second half.
Well, it really was, and Troy Williams has been a guy who has played really well, much improved, I think, even better, as you look at some of the plus-minus numbers over the course of the season. And, of course, that is it's an incomplete metric. It doesn't tell you that much. But when you consistently see a guy who's in the positive like Troy has been, it's a good thing. And he's done a lot of good things. And tonight was just, was a non-factor on offense. He got called out by Dan Dockich once on defense, and there were multiple times before that where he just wasn't good at playing the angles and let guys drive right by him. And Ryan, I want to go real quick to you. You mentioned earlier about Will Sheehy getting abused on defense, and he's been a guy who a lot of his value this year has come from his defense. And I was really impressed with the way Will came out. He's the only guy on this roster, I think, who has played at the Kohl Center. And so I thought it was going to be really important for him to come out and have a good game, help lead this young team in an environment where clearly they haven't had success. No one else has had experience, and we haven't won there in God knows how long. And he really did that early on. I thought the way that he stepped up very confidently early allowed this team to get off to a good start, to get that big first half lead, and then he completely disappeared. And which was disappointing, because it would have been nice if he could have been that 3rd guy to step up and score alongside Yogi and Noah there in the second half. Analyze, if you will, the night in Will Sheehy, which started out well and then kind of faded into oblivion after that.
Yeah, I think he really did come out on fire, and that was a little surprising. Just the way, because he hasn't done that so far this year, really. I mean, he's had good games, but it's usually sort of within the flow of the game. He sort of will come out and do some things. But yeah, that he got shot out of a cannon early. Was playing well defensively, I thought, but in the second half, I thought he was part of the defensive breakdowns. I thought he left. They rotated a few times, and he got left on Brust, and he left him open a few times. I mean, that's a guy. I'm sorry, I don't care what kind of a shooting slump he's in. You can't leave him open ever, because then if you give him one clean look, that's all he needs to get on fire. And so I thought he and Troy Williams, as you mentioned, were both guys that just. It was almost like they weren't not trying. They were out there playing hard. They just weren't playing smart, and that's been the Achilles heel of this team all season. I thought that Will was a microcosm of that for the team tonight. I just thought he was over aggressive, sometimes over helping and leaving guys open, and then a couple times he ran to the baseline and closed out too fast, and the guy went right by him. I mean, it's just that stuff a senior should be smarter than to do. I mean, you'd rather have a guy shooting over you than going by you, and no matter who it is. You don't give him a clean look, but you don't, let a guy just go run right by you, because that puts pressure on the defense. So, he's been the captain of the defense all year, and Indiana's defense largely has been very good this year. I mean, frankly, defense and rebounding are the two things keeping us from a sub 500 record overall. And and he's been good all year. I just thought in this game, particularly defensively, he was awful in the second half, and it may have been him trying to overcompensate for everything. When things went south, he might have been overcompensating for everyone else, but it just was not a good look for Will tonight.
Well, the defense has been good overall, but as I've mentioned, the defense has not been great in the second half of winnable Big Ten games, and we've had leads at halftime against Nebraska, against Minnesota, against Wisconsin. The defense has not played well in the second half. That's been a trend. Andy, I want to ask you something. Tom Crean mentioned after the Purdue game, and he's right, there's a difference between your effort and your attitude towards your effort. That sounds kind of weird and hokey-pokey, but he's right, because, you can play hard, you can give effort, but if you don't have that fight, if you don't have the belief that you're going to win, your attitude isn't quite what it needs to be. And, I talked with Don Fisher about this on Podcast on the Brink, and he agreed as well. And I want to ask you, because we saw in the Purdue game where Indiana played pretty well in the first half, had that collapse right there at the end of the first half, and the second half was just a disaster. They kind of lost their attitude in the second half. And in that Northwestern game, they were really able to keep it, and that's a big reason why they were able to win. And I think the difference was that they believed that whole Northwestern game they were going to win. Even with that 10-point lead at halftime, one of you guys mentioned it, that it's like as soon as Bruss started hitting those threes, it's like, oh, here we go again. Andy, did you see in this second half tonight some of what we saw against Purdue, where it's like, we played them okay for a while, but we kind of don't really believe that we can win this game, and we're running around, we're kind of playing hard, but our attitude isn't quite of a team that believes it can really win this game. Did you see that tonight?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, if you flip it the other way and say, if IU comes on and scores the first 4 points of the second half, and it's now a 14-point lead, I think the rest of the game, IU might lose. Wisconsin may still make a run on them, but I think it's completely different. I thought as soon as Wisconsin scored those first 4 points, you just got that feeling. And I got this feeling as a fan, like, okay, here we go again. We've seen this before. And if you think the team's not thinking the same thing, I think you're kidding yourself. And while they've certainly been in different situations throughout their careers, they haven't really been in those kinds of situations a lot together where they've been able to right the ship. And so there isn't a whole lot that they fall back on as a group and can really hang their hat on to say, look, here's, remember this game when we, did this. They just don't have those experiences yet. And part of that's being young, and part of that is, it's kind of like your first job. You're not going to get experience until you get a job. You're not going to have those experiences until you suck it up one time and really fight back. But it just feels like kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point. So I definitely felt a little bit of that. And you've got guys out there, some of those ones where Williams was closing out. They replayed that play where he kind of closes out on the guy, but he's really not ready to move. And there's no part of him that believes that guy's going to put the ball on the floor, despite the fact that they've put the ball on the floor the entire half. And so I think you see just little things like that, some of the things that Ryan mentioned with Sheehy, and just the general struggles of finding other guys who are willing to step up and take shots. I mean, I called for Robinson to come into the game in the second half just because I knew that he would shoot. I mean, it might not always be a good shot, and a couple of the shots he took in the first half weren't great, but he wasn't afraid of anything. And he came right in after he got in and made that 3-point play, which was another poor call by the official to give him the continuation. And but he at least wasn't afraid to take shots. I mean, Etherington took the one shot because he was wide open and had to. Gordon looked like he wanted no part of shooting. The only shot I remember him taking is when the shot clock's running out. Williams really didn't take shots. He had that one travel there, early in the second half, and Crean talked to him for a while after that. But I mean, he didn't really seem like he wanted to take shots. I mean, you had a whole lot of guys who looked like they were scared to screw something up, and that's not the mentality that's going to win you a game like this. And so you've got guys out there running around, and I was kind of looking while we were talking about the, there's a quote I was trying to remember who it was by, but it was by John Wooden: "Never mistake activity for achievement." So just because you're out there running around doesn't mean anything. So there is that difference between, giving effort and they're not just truly giving up, but you're also not really doing things with a purpose. And doing things the way they need to. So I thought a lot of guys just seemed scared of the moment in the second half, and it didn't take long for that to set in. It wasn't when it was a 3-point game. I felt like it was when, came out, it's a 6-point game. You kind of felt that momentum start to shift, and it didn't really seem like, outside of those couple baskets from Noah early, that they had any answer to really stem the tide.
Yeah, and there was actually, it was a really big play. I think Indiana was down by 2, and Will Sheehey just went up and grabbed an amazing rebound. I mean, it was like he had Troy Williams hops for a possession, grabbed a ridiculous rebound, and kind of fell and lost it, and Sam Decker grabbed it and got a bucket, got fouled, and it was, it put Wisconsin up 5, and I'm not sure we ever got closer. Now,
by the way, since we haven't talked about officiating yet, they put a screenshot up of that, and Will Sheehey did not just fall on his own. He got yanked down from behind by either Brust or Gasser. I don't know. So, yeah, that's why he fell. It wasn't just some random fall. And then, Decker got it and got a touch foul on the lay-in. So, yeah, that's all. I'm not.
Yeah, and again, and I don't know if that's, clearly that's not the difference in the game, but there's plays like that, I think, for this team that they're not quite mature enough yet to get past. Because I actually thought early in the second half, obviously Wisconsin went on that big run, and there were a couple possessions there where they took the lead and Indiana came back and Yogi made a shot. And they took the lead and we were able to come back and do something there for a couple possessions. It went back and forth. And it was a time in the past where as soon as that other team takes the lead, it's almost like, well, the snowball keeps going. And so I thought, at least for a couple possessions, you could take a positive. And I think one of them was Stan Robinson, who just decided, hey, we're down 3 now, but I'm just driving it anyway, and he got fouled. And so, and then obviously things snowballed and it got away from the Hoosiers. But, anyway, as we try to search for positives, some of those. I mean, let me ask you guys real quick. I mean, are there any other individual performances that you want to break down? Because we're getting a lot of questions that are talking more big picture, NCAA/NIT tournament type stuff, and obviously Indiana has a really important, next few days with Iowa and Ohio State coming up. Before we get to that stuff, are there any other individual performances that you guys want to break down? Because like you said earlier, it does in a lot of respects feel like breaking down the same game. Andy, anything else you want to go with individually?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of looking over the box score. I think we've touched on nearly everyone that scored, which is only 5 guys. But I mean, I thought, in general, I don't know that there's too much I would call out. I thought Robinson played well in stretches, particularly in the second half, and he ended up with 5 rebounds, which I thought was good. But, I think what you like about him is the fearlessness. Like I said before, he wasn't afraid to take shots. He wasn't afraid to miss shots. And sometimes that's a curse, but I think on this team, the way that their mentality was at times in this game, that was something that was needed. I didn't really think Hollowell played too bad, and would have liked to see him a little bit more in the second half when it really seemed like Williams didn't have it defensively. I thought he maybe would have been that potential 5th guy to play with to try to round out some kind of lineup that might be able to produce, but not sure how many minutes he ended up with. He was the only other guy that I thought, kind of did something. I thought Etherington didn't really provide a whole lot, kind of got out of the game with some of the fouls. And, I mean, overall, unfortunately, not a lot of performances, even some of the quote-unquote bad performances, they weren't necessarily bad. It was just you could have put almost anybody out there for some of these and gotten the same level of production, which is obviously not where you want to feel.
Yeah, and I guess, the other individual that's really notable to talk about is Honor, and Ryan just brought this up in our chat, and I guess we can just address it really quick now. I mean, it's one of the more anticlimactic returns from a suspension maybe in Big Ten history, because Hunter didn't even come in until the second half, really didn't do much. Let's not belabor this point too much. Ryan, did you have any problem with Hunter coming back after a 2-game suspension? As far as I'm concerned personally, we don't know enough about the background and the whole situation, all the context to really judge. So in a case like this, I'll tend to defer to the coach. Unfortunately for Tom Crean, he's got the focus issue, suspension, non-suspension of Jeremy Hollowell that people can compare this to. What do you think? Is there anything there, or is this, just kind of a non-story?
No, I agree. We don't know enough. This is what when it comes to suspensions and things like that, this is where I tend to stand is, okay, did the kid make a mistake? In this case, a horrible mistake, or is he a bad seed that needs to be severely punished? We don't know the background on previous disciplinary issues with Hunter, things like that. Like, had he ever had one, or was this completely an aberration? So I think that has to go into effect on it. I don't think you suspend. Suspensions aren't necessarily the same for every person. As far as the Jeremy Hollowell one goes, people are talking about that as a comparison. Hollowell was in uniform on the bench for all of those games. He didn't play, but Hunter was completely removed from the team. He was not associated with the team during the suspension. So I think there's a different level here of being away from the team and, as Karina has put it, being out of competition. Look, from everything I have heard, Hunter's a good kid, and his family is really the team. And, he doesn't have family in the area and things like that. And so maybe bringing him back to the team is the way to sort of keep him, focused and not falling off, even further or something like that. But again, we don't know enough. I can't. I know Andy wants to jump in on this, but we can't really talk about it without knowing all the background. And I can guarantee you that this is not something that's been taken lightly. Just from what I've heard, it's very serious, and the team and the athletic department has taken it very seriously. But we'll see how it plays out the rest of the year. But again, I just think that it's they're not all, suspensions aren't all equal. It really depends on a kid-to-kid basis.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is I think for a good thing is we really don't have a lot of precedent for this kind of thing with Crean to really, there really haven't been these kinds of issues since he took over, which is obviously a positive. So you really don't have a great deal to compare it to, and so I think people are naturally making that comparison to Hollowell. I know I did the same thing. And while that wasn't announced as a suspension, everything about it made it seem like it was, and instead of really calling out what it was or wasn't, it was kind of left to be shrouded in mystery, and you leave people to draw their own conclusions. And you see a guy who'd been playing huge minutes for the team and starting all the games, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he just doesn't play. I think when you don't provide other information, and I don't know what other information there was to provide, it certainly makes it feel like a suspension. And so I think it's natural for people to draw those conclusions and say, look, you said this was focus issues. He corrected those in 4 games, and now it's okay for him to play. You look at this scenario, which has had certainly potentially worse ramifications if things go as these kinds of drunk driving situations often can, where it makes it feel like you're taking that more lightly than another situation that people at least perceive to be less serious. So I think you may be right, and we certainly don't know everything, but I think some of the ways that other parts of this, these couple situations were handled has really allowed for that to be the way that people interpret it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think with the Hollowell situation, it might have been who knows, it might have been a situation where, personally they didn't want to get into personal stuff about, what the focus issues were and things like that. I mean, so as a coach, I think you're put in, and I think we agree on this, you're put in a weird situation protecting the privacy of the kid while also, your responsibility to the university and to the fans and things like that. So, but I just think that this is a situation where you have to assume that this was a shorter suspension just because of previous disciplinary issues, attitude issues, things like that have not been an issue, and therefore, he got a bit of a benefit of the doubt. That's what I'm assuming. Again, we don't know, but I just think that it's logical to make that assumption that, that this was something that, while very serious, it's a kid who hasn't been a problem and, is clearly showing remorse and doing what he needs to do to get back on track, and that is heartening for the athletic department and Coach Crean. And also, people are saying, oh, it's a 2-game suspension, it's a 2-game suspension. I think it was more of a time suspension. I think it was 11 days away from the team, and there would have been another game in there. I'm just assuming that. I don't know if it was a 2-game suspension or if it was a time suspension, but I believe that the attitude was sort of he's going to be away from the team for a time. It wasn't a game thing, and had the Iowa game not been canceled, this would have been 3 games. It doesn't make a difference. I think that's splitting hairs, the game length and whatever. It's more about, does this kid make changes and fix things and come back and be a positive influence on the rest of the team.
A couple of representative questions here that we're getting from viewers concerning the big picture. Robert Weber, do you believe the Hoosiers are beginning to slip away even from NIT consideration? And then we've got another one here from All Indiana, Hoosier Nation. With these next three big home games, is there still NIT or is there still tourney hopes or hello NIT? We'll go around the horn real quick and get everybody's thoughts on this. My thoughts are that the NCAA tournament should not be in your thoughts right now. I think if we had somehow pulled this win off tonight, now you can start saying, hey, maybe we're inching onto the bubble, and if we can win 3 out of the next 4 or split and make a big run in the Big Ten tournament, you can start thinking about it. Right now you're going to have to win out and maybe get to the Big Ten title game and possibly, I mean, obviously if you win it, you're going to get there, but possibly get to the Big Ten title game to even think about it. I think what you want to see from this team with the games that we have coming up, right, at home against Iowa, we play Ohio State, we play Nebraska, and we play Michigan. I mean, those are 4 teams that are in the upper echelon in the Big Ten. Pretty sure that's the rest of the schedule. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Those are all 4 really tough games, but they're all winnable games because this is a program that's played very well against Michigan. That's the one road game. Obviously, home games are winnable, and all of those teams are flawed. Iowa has been ranked highly all year, but they're struggling a little bit, lost to Minnesota tonight. Ohio State is offensively challenged, and Nebraska hasn't been quite as good away from home as they've been at home, but they also beat Michigan State in the Breslin Center. So, you look at those games, they're all 4 games Indiana could win, and they're all 4 games Indiana can lose. And so I think when you look at us, we've got a cushion to at least have the winning record that you need for the NIT, and so I think the NIT is certainly the floor. I mean, if you don't make the NIT, now you're talking about just a real epic failure. And I think just where things have been, what the team's record is right now, you'd have to say that that's the probability. If this team somehow makes a run to the NCAA tournament, that would be unreal. So I think, are the NIT hopes slipping away? No, not at all. NCAA tournament hopes, not even really realistic right now. And so I think it's important to reset expectations a little bit. If you're only going to be happy from here on out if the team makes the NCAA tournament, then you might as well stop watching because that's probably not going to happen. But if you can start to look at this from the standpoint of let's make some improvements, let's grow the rest of this year to make for a better next year and to just get as much out of this year as we can, there's still a lot to play for this year. And even if that is getting into the NIT and making a deep run that can lead to some positive momentum for next year, that's still a positive. It's a disappointment overall, but we can break that down at the end of the season. I think for the rest of this season, it's important to look at things in that context because I think it'll allow you on a game-by-game basis to get a little bit more out of these games, and hopefully the team looks at it the same way. We'll see. That's just my thoughts. So let me get your thoughts on it. Andy, we'll go to you first, and then Ryan, just in terms of expectations for the rest of this year.
Yeah, I'm kind of where you are. I mean, if you look just by the numbers, NIT-wise, 15 and 12 right now. I'm looking at this. I guess they removed the requirement that you have to be 500 or greater receiver bid, although anybody who's gotten one since they removed that criteria has been 500 or better. So you figure 4 regular season, at least 1 Big Ten tournament game left. You got to go 1 and 4 in those to guarantee yourself at least 500. I would certainly hope that is that's attainable. So I think in that regard, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's no reason to entertain thoughts of the NCAA tournament at this point, despite how terrible the bubble is. You look at NIT, and I do think they're winnable games. Iowa has struggled away from home of late. They were torched by Minnesota in the first half tonight, and managed to, and Minnesota held on to win that game. They're a team that's kind of struggled when it's gotten to close games down the stretch, and so I think that's a possibility. Ohio State's really good defensively, but has struggled at times on offense, and home game against Nebraska. While they're playing really well, they're not an offensive juggernaut either. I think the road game at Michigan is probably a bridge too far to end the season. But I kind of feel like a broken record where you just really want to look for progress and consistency, and that's really the main thing that I think has eluded this team in large part over the first part of the. It's not really the first part; it's the majority of the season so far, where we keep trying to look for these trends where you see the same improvements game over game. You see the same guys make improvements game over game, or at least 2 out of 3 games, 3 out of 4 games, where you at least see a more positive trend that's there. And I think that kind of consistency has really eluded the team to this point so far. And so I guess if I'm looking at anything the rest of the season, that's probably what it is. But I think it's difficult, and I think it'll be interesting to see how, continuing to see how, motivated and how the team just responds. Where, how many times can you set yourself up and play well in these halves, and then, falter in the second half, and at what point does that really, wear on this team in a way that maybe it hasn't manifested itself so far this season. So, still a lot of basketball left, a lot of chances to add good things, but I think just as many chances for things to kind of come off the rails still, even with a relatively small number of games left.
Yeah, I think the NIT would absolutely die to have Indiana just because of the exposure and the fan support and everything. And I think that the people of the NIT would be hoping that Indiana made a run in the tournament. So I don't think that's a worry. I think that as long as Indiana finishes out the way it should with it, at least one win, you'll see them go into the NIT, no doubt about that. As far as the NCAA tournament, don't even focus on that right now. I think that, as I said 2 games ago, the goal, the absolute ceiling goal would be 20 wins for the season, including any postseason tournament. At least that's something you can hang your hat on and say, hey, with all the difficulty, we won 20 games. Is it likely? Probably not. But, I mean, you've got to have a goal. And I think that, if you can step away from this season, say we had all these problems, regardless if we go to the NIT, if wherever we finish in the Big Ten, if we finish with 20 wins, you can say, hey, that was a 20-win season. We faced a lot of adversity. A lot of things were screwed up. These players weren't coming together the way they should have. They were young, made mistakes, blah, blah, blah. If you can say, well, we still won 20 games, that's something to hang your hat on and at least build towards for next year. Is it going to happen? I don't know. It's probably unlikely at this point, but I mean, you've got to have sort of a goal in mind, or else you're just playing out the string. And I think that 20-win barrier is something that at least the team could look at and say, hey, let's get there. And but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, who knows what to expect from this team? I mean, we can expect one of two things, and that's either they come out playing their butts off and really shock one of the better teams in the Big Ten, or they play relatively well and then collapse in the second half. It seems like those are the two ways they play against the types of teams they're going to be playing in the next 4 games. So it's going to be one or the other, more than likely. So hopefully it's the former and not the latter.
You got to love Doc Livy, Yogi's mom, reading some of her tweets. She's trying to keep everybody positive on Twitter tonight, as she will often do after a loss. But interesting, she's talking about next year, saying that we will mature, adding James Blackman and Robert Johnson will definitely help us out. But remember, they will be new guys, which means they'll have to find their spot on the team. And to quote her, remember when people were hanging their hat on the movement? I'm just saying. Of course, her son was a prominent member of the movement, and some of the other guys of that recruiting class have struggled a little bit. Although I will say, I continue to say I like some of the things I'm seeing from Jeremy Hollowell in spurts. It seems like he's at least getting some of his confidence back. And I don't know if it'll all fully come back this year, but it's at least giving me hope that maybe for next year he can still be a building block for this program moving forward. All right, Andy, get your hot Evan Gordon opinions ready, because we do have a question about him, and actually I think it's a good one. From Andy Tuwalski. Evan Gordon, let me read the question out real quick. Evan Gordon seems to have his minutes jerked around more than anyone on the team. 35 against Penn State, 11 versus Illinois, 24 tonight. Considering the diminishing returns he has shown on the court, and you mentioned earlier tonight, he didn't even seem like he wanted a part of taking a shot, which I agree with, and he was 0 for 2. Would you rather see the younger guys taking those minutes, especially now as the team is 5-9 and seems to be playing more for the future? And if so, who?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted out early in the second half tonight when he was, I think, one of the first guys off the bench when Etherington got into foul trouble again, that I'd rather seen Robinson in there. I think, for the reasons I said earlier, I think Gordon has really, I do agree that the minutes have been a factor with him, but really outside of the Michigan game, he really has struggled quite a bit lately, even in and you look back to some of those earlier games when he was really on a hot streak, and I kind of found myself at the beginning of the year, I watched the first few games, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure what the thought process is here with this guy, and then he goes through that stretch where he scores 15 points, 26 points, 11 points in consecutive games, albeit against not great competition, and you kind of felt like, oh, look, you see him as being kind of a stabilizing factor and whatever else, and really since then has struggled quite a bit. And I do, the minutes thing is good. When he was starting, he's playing 30 plus minutes a game, and then most of the other games since then he's been in the teens. But at this point he for whatever reason he doesn't seem to have any confidence in his shot. Whether you attribute that to how he's being used or whatever, I don't know that it even matters at this point in the season. That you've got a guy out there where it just doesn't feel like he's at no, like I said, at no point did I think when he got the ball he was going to take a shot or really do anything positive, and he just it is kind of devoid of confidence. And Robinson has had some issues defensively, but he's also shown great flashes where he's really good on defense. So it doesn't even feel like it's an offense-defense kind of thing. And for a team like this that doesn't have a lot of guys who can score, if Gordon's out there and is not going to be able to take and make open shots, then I'd much rather have a guy like Robinson out there who A, is just trying to grow, as a player, as a freshman, and B, it is not, almost to a fault, not afraid of anything that's going on out there. So yeah, I think we're definitely at the point where it's, build for the future, bring up the guys from the minors, let them get at bats part of the season that you see baseball teams reach. I mean, you got to kind of figure things out because you're going to have, kind of a log jam in the backcourt next year when you look at who's coming in and who's already here. And, I think Robinson, the more you let him play and see what he has and let him build up that experience, because you're going to be in a position next year where if you want to put your best lineup on the floor, you're going to be playing three guards who are, not over 6'2", 6'3", I don't think, and that may be what they need to do. But I do think it's good to give him that experience compared to Gordon at this point. I think if he was shown a better willingness to shoot the ball, then I'm willing to let him ride it out. But he just doesn't really seem all that kind of into the games. Doesn't feel like.
Yeah, I was just looking it up, and in our two biggest wins, which were Wisconsin and Michigan, Evan Gordon had 8 points in each, and there were 8 huge points, especially against Michigan. I was there live, and right when the flow of the game seemed to be getting away from us, he was real aggressive, going to the hoop, getting baskets, being aggressive, things like that. And we just haven't seen that from him enough. Against Wisconsin, he had 8 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists. I mean, played 33 minutes, but when have we seen that from him other than that, And so to win some of these games, we need him. I mean, he's a senior. He's an older guy, 1,000-point scorer, all these things where he's been through a lot during his career. I think that Coach Crean really expected more from him and expected, a guy to be a leader and a really good influence on the floor. And when things break down, you can rely on your senior and to at least set something up or involve somebody or something, and he just hasn't gotten that this year. And I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work out the way everybody plans it to. But I think that we all expected him to come in and sort of be a guy who could be relied upon to be an older leader kind of guy. And maybe it just hasn't worked out. Maybe he hasn't gelled with the team or the system or something. But it really hasn't worked out. I don't know if that means that you need to banish him. But he's clearly seen his minutes diminish. In some games where he's played well, you've seen him go up, but for the most part, they've been steadily diminishing all year. And also a friend of mine who is an assistant coach for a basketball team in northern Indiana played against James Blackman, and he texted me to say that the defense he designed held him to his lowest point total of the year, which was 18 points. So I had to mention that. Coach Bennett. And he also said that Blackman is a legit 6'3". So, hey, at least we'll have some size on the perimeter next year, right?
Ah, very nice. A couple quick stats here before we go to our final thoughts because they just jump out horribly. Via Alex Bozich of Inside the Hall, Wisconsin finished with 1.71 points per possession in the second half. That's insane. Their free throw rate was 90.4%. 76.1 effective field goal percentage. So it was pretty much as bad as we thought it was just watching it. And also from Twitter, this via our own Andy Bottoms reporting news in the chat here. Our halftime record in the last 9 games, 8-1. Our actual record, 3-6. So
to be fair, I did not come up with that. So I retweeted that from somebody else. I'll look it up now so I can give them proper credit. We don't need any kind of stat stealing controversy
Right.
after tonight's game, certainly.
We don't. But to get the numbers that Andy does come up with, go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on our free email list because we provide in-depth analysis that you don't get anywhere else and that you will not want to miss. Okay. With that said, we're going to move to final thoughts. I'm going to tease mine by saying that I have a little bit of information, maybe, I don't know, that may give you some hope for next season. So you're going to have to listen to my final thought to get it. But before we do that, we'll go to Andy, then we'll go to Ryan, and we will close out another unfortunately losing episode of the Assembly Call.
So to properly attribute that, it was Evan Hoopfer, who is with the IDS, who tweeted that out. So,
and by the way, those guys have a new podcast, Paperboys. Unfortunately, they don't have it on iTunes yet. I don't see a place to subscribe, but follow Evan on Twitter. Those guys are doing a really nice job, and I've been listening to their podcast, and they do good work.
Awesome. So, I mean, as far as the game, I feel like I don't know what to say that we haven't said already. That it was, tale of two halves. You saw some great things in the first half that just were not sustainable. Struggled to get consistency out of guys other than really the big two tonight of Noah and Yogi, and you're just not going to beat good teams that way when at this point in the season you can't figure out how to get consistent contributions from a number of guys, which was a real contrast to what we saw against Northwestern, where you had 4 guys that had at least 12 points. I think the first time that had happened since December I had looked up, and it all speaks to the inconsistency of the team at this point, which is obviously extremely frustrating for us, obviously extremely frustrating for the players and the coaches and everything like that as you start to look at where we are at this point in the season. And we've relegated ourselves to talking about how many wins it takes to get into the NIT, which makes the season on the drink even more of a season on the drink. And it's just kind of where we are right now, and it's unfortunate. You've got home games coming up, got 3 home games coming up next, and hopefully can pick up some wins there and build some momentum. But certainly easy to get discouraged for everybody and easy for things to snowball as we've seen over the course of the season. And I think from the coaching standpoint, those trends are, while that's not all attributable to coaches, I mean, those are things that people are going to throw out and that, Crean is under no obligation to actually answer for, but those are things that are actually happening. So, people are going to draw their own conclusions in the same way that they did with the suspensions and everything else, and they're going to look at stats like that and say, and question the ability to make halftime and in-game adjustments. And I think that's a fair criticism at this point, based on what we've seen. But again, I'm not sure that made all the difference in the world tonight, because like I said, I think we could all sit here and try to figure out who we thought the right 5 on the floor would be and would have a hell of a time coming up with 5. So that for me was the story of tonight. Just couldn't get contributions from enough guys to be able to stem the tide. And another disappointing loss, another double-digit lead that I'm almost hoping we don't get a double-digit lead again. And I will be out signing petitions for my no more halftimes movement. That's the new movement. It will be for no more halftimes. Just continue playing. Don't go to the locker room, and move on to the second half and see what happens. That, or just stop the game at halftime and not even coach the rest of it. So either of those I'm open to.
And Andy, I just want to commend you on broadcasting tonight with 4 fouls the entire time. Wasn't sure that you'd make it to final thoughts, but you did.
It was rough.
Yeah. Very well done. Okay.
TV Teddy wanted to keep me in for the final stretch run, so we're good.
Yes, excellent. All right, Ryan, over to you. Final thoughts.
Just a tough loss. I think we're used to going up to the Kohl Center and just having a bad time. That's just sort of the way it's been over the years. Right now this team is where it's been all season, or all Big Ten season. It's at a precarious point, and it seems like they, just when it looks like they're going to lose the rest of their games, they pull out a win that we didn't see coming necessarily. Not to say that Northwestern we didn't see coming, but given everything that had happened, I mean, I don't think anybody would have been surprised if they dropped that game. All I can say is where we're at with this team. I said it before I came on the air. I didn't even want to break this game down because it's the same. It seems like it's the same recipe every time. But all I can say is when things go bad and you're having a tough time, support the kids. They're out there trying. Don't get down on them. I mean, there's a lot of circumstances and a lot of things happening that are really rough on them. They hate losing way more than we do. And so, always try and support the players. I know some people don't like the coaching situation. That's fine. You enjoy your self-loathing area in there, hating, following IU basketball. I won't. I think that there's a lot of positives still going on with this program, and this was always going to be a building year. I don't think any of us wanted it to be this hard, but sometimes you got to go through rough patches to get to the good ones, and that's just what we've been dealing with all year, and it's tough. But we can't selfishly as fans really hang it on on the players and get down on them and angry at them and stuff like that. They're still kids playing a game, and hopefully they're learning from this, and things will get better, and the future is brighter.
Yeah, a rough loss tonight for Indiana. We lose by 11. I guess I'm not feeling as crushed about this one as I have about other losses, only because I didn't expect a whole lot different. I expected us to lose by somewhere around 10 to 11 tonight, and certainly I hope for better, and certainly after that first half I thought it would be better in the second half, and that second half was very disappointing. And certainly we want to get back to the point where the standard is expecting to win even games in the Kohl Center, right? And where you're not going into that game expecting let's just compete, let's keep it competitive and have a chance at the end, which is what I was thinking kind of before the game started. And we've had that the last 2 years. We don't really this year, despite a lot of talent, and hopefully that's something that corrects itself next year. But as I look at tonight's game, I'm going to walk away from this game feeling positive about Noah Vonleh, because I thought that what we saw was a guy who was really determined to make an impact on the game. And I think there have been times, especially against Indiana's tougher opponents, where Noah has kind of faded into the background some, and especially when things have gotten a little bit tougher in those second halves and Indiana's really needed him, he hasn't always been willing to step up, and I thought tonight he was. I mean, obviously in the first half he was able to knock down some threes and did some good things, but even in the second half, when Wisconsin was making their run, there was a 3-possession stretch there where Noah got the ball on the wing and took it every single time. Now, the first 2 possessions in that 3-possession stretch, he dribbled the ball and lost it, and those were those 2 possessions where he was diving straight on the floor. But you know what? He took it again the next possession and ended up scoring. And so I think, again, if we look for small victories to take from tonight, it's that Indiana really focused on getting him the ball in different ways than they had before. And he, Noah took advantage and played with an aggressiveness and just a little bit of an FU attitude that we've been hoping to see from him, that his talent demands, but that maybe mentally and emotionally he's not ready to have yet. We started to see that some tonight. And my goodness, is his talent tantalizing when he puts it on display like he did tonight. And I just started thinking as we're watching tonight that I don't think I can't remember another player who's come in that has a greater 4-year ceiling than Noah in terms of what he could be from a freshman to senior. Now, we'll never see that clearly. I mean, at most, he's going to play perhaps 1 more year, right? And my stance on the whole Noah to the NBA thing has never changed. I want him to do the what's right for him, and if his goal has always been to jump to the NBA and he can do it, and being in the top 13, being a lottery pick is what he wants, and he can do that, then that's great. And if he wants to stay and he wants to mature another year and improve his draft stock next year, my goodness, would we love to have him back. And so when I kind of tease some good news, I hope everybody feels that way. I hope that we don't selfishly want Noah back just for our own fan interest, because the thought of this team with what we have coming in and with Noah coming back, another year of maturity, things can get really good again really quickly. But, again, want what's best for him. But all I'm going to say is, in terms of that discussion, Noah to the NBA, all of that, everything I'm hearing from back and front channels confirms what Ryan told us a couple weeks ago, that this seems like a kid that is, that may end up staying a second year. Yogi's mom tweeted out earlier tonight that she honestly thinks the roster will stay intact. And some of the things that I'm hearing, and even the little kind of mini controversy that came out of the Northwestern game where, Josh Lewin was talking about having the conversation with Crean about getting kids who were going to unpack their bags. And Crean made a point on his show with Don Fisher to say that he wouldn't have said that, never comments on a guy's status, which he doesn't. But all I'm saying is some of the things that I'm starting to hear, that other people are starting to hear, suggest he may come back. We'll see. It's something that we haven't discussed too much on the show because there's so much speculation involved. But I feel that, it's our duty to kind of pass along things to you when we hear them. And so, whereas maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, if I were a betting man, I would have bet on him going. Now, if I were a betting man, I'd probably say that maybe it's more even, or I'd even bet on him staying. We'll see. That's what Ryan's been saying all along, and so I would love to get a big giant "I told you so" from him, and he's waving at me right down there, but we'll see. Anyway, tough loss tonight, but I don't think this is one to get too upset about. This isn't losing at home to Northwestern. This is an 11-point loss on the road in a place that we haven't won in a long time. This isn't the team that's going to break the streak in the Kohl Center. Maybe next year's team can be the team that's going to break the streak in the Kohl Center. So, do yourself a favor as a fan. Take the positives that you can from this game, notably the play of Noah Vonleh, the play of the team in the first half, and let's hope that the team can build on that going forward, because there are 3 definitely winnable games moving forward. Those 3 games in Assembly Hall against flawed teams. Again, Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, all good teams, but all flawed teams. We can beat all of them. At Michigan, obviously, it would be tough, but we've beaten Michigan 3 straight times we played them, at least. I don't know, maybe going back the year before we beat them more, but at least 3 straight times. So that's not a game really that I fear. So there are still good things that can come from this season. It's still important to be positive, stick with this team. A lot of good can still come, both for this season and as we build toward next season. Thank you, everybody who watched tonight. We really appreciate it. Of course, bookmark assemblycall.com/live and come there at the end of every game, because we're always here with the post-game show. My thanks to Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips for joining me tonight, Zach Gropper on the controls, and all of you who listened and who will listen on the podcast. Make sure you go subscribe to us on iTunes, assemblycall.com/iTunes. And I will reiterate, get on our email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. The work Andy's doing is great. It really adds depth to your knowledge as an IU basketball fan, and so you don't want to miss those emails. All right, everybody. We'll be back again. It's a quick turnaround Thursday night, another late show. As I tweeted out earlier today, the realest of the real IU fans are here with us at the end of these games, even when it's 2 games in 3 days and they're both at 8 o'clock. That's why we appreciate you being here live, and everybody who listens on the podcast. Thank you for the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris. We will talk to you on Thursday.